Marker. And action.
This is Behind the Bells, the show that takes you behind the magic of your favorite Christmas movies and shows. Within the background of every Santa Claus, reindeer, and stocking is a story. Where did it come from? Our Christmas movie expert will unravel all of that and give you the full story. Sit back and enjoy another episode with Robert Nicholas.
Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Bells. I'm your host, Robert Nicholas, and I'll be taking you on another one-horse open sleigh ride into the world of Christmas movies. From where we last left off, it was 1985, in which Michael Eisner had witnessed just how popular Ernest P. Worrell had become from his commercials. During the Indy 500 Festival Parade, even though the governor of Indiana and Mickey Mouse got their fair share of cheers, it was Jim Varney's appearance as Ernest that got the biggest applause of all. This was the result of major appearances in hundreds of commercials in the Midwest and Southern states. Even major brands were starting to hire the character. His goofy face was soon going to be associated with Coke, Mellow Yellow, Chex cereal, and even car companies. His clumsy ladder was only going higher. And of course, the rule of Hollywood is that if something is popular, you have to see how far you can make money with it. John Cherry, the advertising genius who created Ernest, was summoned to the Disney Studios in Burbank, where both sides talked about getting Ernest in a movie. Years before, there was already an attempt at a partial Ernest movie with Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Bean. My last episode went into more detail on how Ernest was only a small character and that the purpose of that comedy was to showcase the talent of Jim Varney. It was never able to gain enough steam to warrant a larger theatrical release. But Ernest was still going strong in commercials, so if anyone was going to get on the bandwagon that hadn't slowed down, it was going to be Disney, who themselves were still finding a new modern voice. Varney had spent most of his life aspiring to be the talented actor his family and friends saw him for, but never thought about this one character from a commercial would be his big break. It would lead into an internal conflict that a lot of character actors tend to face, that they're remembered for only one thing. Now that he was about to join the Disney family, this was going to make his career both easier and harder. On one hand, he was going to have a lot more work as Ernest. He also wanted to show that he was more than capable of branching outside his redneck and could handle stories like Shakespeare. After all, he'd already done so back in high school. But now that Disney was providing the backing to put Ernest on a bigger stage, Varney had to prove he could make an entire nation laugh, perhaps the entire world. Would he be able to pull it off? How would Ernest fare in his first movie? How would Ernest Saves Christmas become what John Cherry considers the best of the movies? How would its production launch an industry in Central Florida? Would it become a Christmas classic? And of course, why I personally still enjoy it, even though I'm aware that it has a lot of things setting it back from becoming a genuinely good comedy. Let's dive into the world of Ernest. This is part 2 of the Ernest Saves Christmas story. In 1987, Ernest Goes to Camp would be released as the first movie as a part of a major 3-picture deal. Jim Varney had now gone from an unknown actor from Kentucky to a major star who now had more power and influence, or as much as he could from playing Ernest. Production on Ernest Goes to Camp had gone very smoothly. Though they were given the option of shooting on sound stages in LA, it was decided that the movie would be better suited in the Tennessee woods at the Montgomery Bell State Park. I searched, but I couldn't find any information on how they came up with the summer camp theme. My guess was that it would check off several things. First, given that Ernest was already a Southern character, keeping him in a Southern setting would be more natural. Second, Ernest was already popular with kids, so putting him in a location with kids would make him more relatable. Finally, by having a summer camp-based story, it would be an easy sell for Disney. It would give the company a reason to try for an early summer release right before the time most kids head off to summer camp. It would also give more opportunity for slapstick gags. Now, having rewatched the old commercials, it can be seen that the more physical Ernest can become, the more over the top his reaction can be whenever he falls off a ladder or gets electrocuted, or by having a door slam in his face. The bigger question was now figuring out how to expand his character from 90 seconds to 90 minutes. Let's talk about Ernest as a comedic character. Now, some might call me ridiculous for making this comparison, though Ernest happens to fall in the same category as Charlie Chaplin's Little Tramp. This does not mean that Ernest is as great as a character as the Tramp, but they do have similar traits. Both are considered little guys, both seem like big kids in adult bodies, both use the environment to help tell their story, both happen to star in movies with little to no continuity, and most importantly, both knew who their audiences were. But it was exactly who their audiences were is where Ernest would find his appeal somewhat limiting. Chaplin saw his character as the everyman that anyone can see themselves in, remaining silent so that an international audience could enjoy him. Varney knew that Ernest was mostly going to appeal to children. He also knew that with his southern personality, the majority of his fans would be American. So why not put him in stories where children can see themselves in? Why not embrace the American nature within and be all he could be? Now, I don't consider Ernest even close to a complex character, but Ernest Goes to Camp also did show more vulnerability that Varney was more than capable of pulling off. Yes, he had his scenes of his consistently reminding the audience that his dream was to become a full-time camp counselor. Yes, he was so in touch with the camp that he was one of the few people who could speak the Native American language that the camp owner could only speak. And yes, he was willing to save the camp enough when he took a punch to the face by a brutish construction worker, but he also got to show a sad side when at his lowest, he breaks out into an original song, "Gee, I'm Glad It's Raining."
Gee, I'm glad it's raining. There's always something to be thankful for. I'm awfully glad it's raining, 'cause no one sees your teardrops when it pours. And no one knows the thunder is your heartbreak in disguise. They think the rainy nights what put that sad look in your eyes. Sure.
Apparently, when Varney sang the song in one take, there was not a dry eye from the crew. It's an effective song that reinforces that you've lost everything, but don't want to admit you're scared, hence the rainfall covering your tears. Some might call it schmaltzy and a sugar-coated melody, but it is a good performance. Now, Ernest Goes to Camp prove that Ernest can carry a movie? Well, the audiences did, as it managed to gross $23 million against a $3 million budget. Critics, however, were not as kind to it. Disney seemed to be aware that the movie wouldn't be well received by the press, and did not hold advanced screenings. When they did come out, some had ranged from 1-star reviews to quote-unquote, the least important 90 minutes of your life, and even calling Ernest a grotesque character. John Cherry took the reviews in stride as he said, "They're trying to find artistic value to something that's purely a commercial enterprise. It's like an art critic reviewing a baseball card." I get where he's coming at. He's not only aware that there's little point in critiquing something that's essentially an extended commercial for the commercial. He knows that comedy is hard to review because it's entirely subjective. What I could find funny, like the Monty Python and the Holy Grail, others could point out as the dumbest stuff out there. What others find great, like Amy Schumer, I find boring and unrelatable. I'll get more into the subjective nature of Ernest later. Like for any major movie studio, if one movie makes money, then you put even more to gain more. Work had begun on Ernest Saves Christmas even before Ernest Goes to Camp was released. John Cherry had originally intended to send Ernest to a tropical location for the sequel, but it never made it beyond the story drafts. It was decided that A Christmas Tale would be the next best thing. Before they came up with the story, it had already been decided that only Ernest would appear. None of the characters from camp would return. Not the boys, not his boss, not the nurse, and not even the two goofy chefs. There wouldn't even be a reference to the events of the last movie. This is where the Ernest movies took on a similar continuity to Chaplin or Buster Keaton, in which there was none, except for the main character. I think part of the reason for making these movies going forward without much continuity was because while Camp was shot in Tennessee, Ernest Saves Christmas would be shot in Orlando, Florida. Hence, rather than having a written reason to explain his move, it was just easier to make Ernest a character that could be thrown into any environment. So why Florida of all places? Because Disney was a construction of a combination working studio and a theme park called Disney MGM Studios. To be honest, it was built to intentionally compete with Universal Studios, who was building something similar. In fact, Universal would even sue Disney for copying the parks too close. That would be eventually settled out of court. Ernest Saves Christmas wasn't just the first movie to shoot at Disney World, but it was also one of the first movies to be shot in Orlando. The local reaction was initially mixed. It had nothing to do with Ernest and the content of the movie, but rather of a coastal industry making its way to the south, wanting to bring in a permanent industry. Most residences were excited and were welcoming to both Disney and Universal. The Teamsters on Union Cruise, however, wouldn't be on board, but we'll get to that later. Script for Ernest Saves Christmas would be written by Ed Turner and B. Klein. When I looked up their names on IMDb, I couldn't find any other credits to their name, but I did find they worked for John Cherry up in Nashville for the latter's advertising company. The initial draft had focused on Ernest being next in line to becoming Santa Claus when the current one was ready to pass the job on. John Cherry thought the idea was great, and it even hoped it would justify for a much larger budget than Ernest Goes to Camp. When the concept was pitched to Disney, the executives liked the holiday angle, just not the part about Ernest becoming Santa Claus. According to John Cherry, Disney couldn't fathom Ernest as Santa. They didn't want to distort the legend. In other words, Disney did not want the newest Santa to be a skinny, bumbling redneck. They wanted the traditional Santa, someone older, fat, and a beard. The script was rewritten so that Santa was now searching for a new character, Joe Carruthers, who was supposed to be a mix of Mr. Rogers and Captain Kangaroo. But now that his show had gotten canceled, he would now be free to take up the mantle of Santa. Ernest would now be tasked to helping Santa find this man. The consequence of the story rewrite was that Ernest would lose some kind of character arc. Rather than starting as himself and becoming Santa, he would start and remain himself. Still cab driver, still an idiot. This would make him almost a side character since, oddly enough, everyone else had an arc. Santa would see the good in everyone, Joe would find his Christmas spirit to see the magic, Harmony would realize the errors of being a runaway, and even Chuck and Bobby, a Laurel and Hardy-like duo that first appeared in the new Ernest show, Hey Vern, it's Ernest, would give in to the Christmas magic. Ernest was now acting as the story's catalyst, setting the story's comedy of errors in motion. With the script being finished, John Cherry had sent fellow producer and Ernest creator Coke Sams down to Orlando to start location scouting. Somehow, Disney had gotten word and phoned John Cherry about it.
As I understand, you have sent Coke Sams to Florida to look for locations.
Yeah, he gets all the fun jobs.
You don't have permission to do that.
I don't need permission to do that.
Well, yes, you do.
Oh no, I do not. I can play sophomore games with the best of them.
You won't be reimbursed.
I didn't ask for reimbursement.
You need to come over to the lot and have a philosophy meeting.
While we're spending my money, we will do what we want, what I want to do. When it becomes your money we are spending, we will do what you want to do. Philosophy meeting over.
Cherry would later get a call from Disney's top lawyer from the legal department to clarify the production rules when working for Disney. The company didn't like when productions tried to play by their own rules. With the script finally complete and everything approved, the movie's budget was set at $6 million, which was a nice increase compared to Ernest Goes to Camp, but still seen as a low budget by Hollywood standards. This meant that Jim Varney was going to be the only known star at all. Everyone else casted, including Douglas Seale as Santa, Oliver Clark as Joe, Robert Lesser as Marty, and Noel Parker as Harmony Star, were all lesser-known actors having come from television. I guess that's fitting, as Jim Varney got his start in television. I'm going to take a short break, but when we get back, we'll discuss the shooting of Ernest Saves Christmas.
And now back to the show with our Christmas movie expert, Robert Nicholas.
The movie began production in early summer of 1988, just after Jim had gotten married. The weather was very hot, give or take around 90 degrees most days, with a ton of humidity added on top. But despite the oppressive heat, the spirits were up as downtown Orlando had decorated itself for Christmas during the earlier scenes of the movie, in which Ernest and Santa meet Harmony for the first time. A lot of the holiday decor came from local business owners who were excited about the potential work to come from Hollywood. Some were just as excited to have an Ernest movie shot there. If there was someone who wasn't as enthusiastic, it was the Teamsters. I haven't had a chance to brush up on my knowledge on the union rules in Florida, but many were outraged at how the movie wasn't hiring union. According to John Cherry, it wasn't because he disliked them or disagreed with their policies, though he did admit that their tactics almost seemed sleazy and mafia-like. It more had to do with the economics. With any union, there are several terms and conditions that call for breaks, time off, and most importantly, pay. The budget on Ernest Saves Christmas was already low, and it was unlikely that Disney would have given him more even if it was going to be a major blockbuster. But it wasn't, and the crew knew it. Disney was aware that the movie would be a small hit at best. So when choosing where the money had to go, Teamsters were low priority. From day one, Teamsters picketed outside the sets. They marched back and forth with signs that made references to crony capitalism and how the conditions were really bad, even though none had even seen what was even going on. You'd think that Disney would have taken note, but when the movie was shooting, they had a very hands-off approach. Like I said, the budget was small in the movie, so they probably felt the movie wouldn't justify a ton of press, even with the popularity of Ernest. Not to mention that even with Disney World in close distance, very few people from the movie studio were even in Florida. So it's very possible that they even knew that there was any kind of controversy going on. For a while, John Cherry didn't let the picketing slow down the production. The shooting itself went pretty smooth, if not smoother than before, having learned the mistakes on Ernest Goes to Camp. It was said that Cherry did a lot of storyboard work to plan out the scenes and sketches. That would help cut the rehearsal time down and keep the production planned accordingly. This resulted in very few problems. One problem that did arise that wasn't planned involved the reindeer. When it came time to shoot the B-plot about Chuck and Bobby handling Santa's reindeer, they didn't factor in the Florida weather and how that would affect the animals. They originally came from Working Wildlife, a company in Los Angeles owned by Steve Martin that specialized in animal actors. The day before they were supposed to shoot their first scene, almost all had shedded their antlers. This threw John Cherry off, as he was unaware that reindeers had even shed their antlers at all. They canceled the shoot for the day to come up with solutions. Prosthetics or faux antlers were considered, but was scrapped after learning that the heads of reindeer were too tender and sensitive for something that heavy. Cherry was frustrated as waiting for them to grow back would set the budget further. He even said, "Reindeer antlers cost me $250,000. He consulted a friend from Hollywood who told him, "The only way you're going to ensure total control is to use animatronics." Of course, animatronics were not an option, as even one would be too expensive. He eventually decided to push all the reindeer scenes for the end of the shoot, except that they would return to Nashville, an easier climate for the animals. This would also force that part of the production to be paid out of pocket. Around Orlando, various locations used included the Orlando International Airport, which was used for the beginning of the film, Terminal B of that airport, Lake Ola, Church Street Station, a toll booth on the B-Line Expressway, the Orlando Amtrak Station, which was used for a scene in which Harmony tries to leave with Santa's sack, a local TV studio called WOFL, which was a local Fox affiliate, and the Orlando Science Center, which stood in as the Orlando Children's Museum. Teamsters still picketed around the production, which was starting to make for bad press. Their only way away from that was to shoot the rest of the movie on Disney property, where protesting was not allowed. A lot might assume that this would violate constitutional laws of the First Amendment, but Disney World practically sits in its own country and district. Side note, when Disney World was built, as there was still desire to build the experimental prototype city tomorrow, aka Epcot, the company had wanted as much independence as possible from the state government. So in the mid-60s, 3 major landowners, which were false subsidiaries of the Walt Disney Company, had successfully petitioned the Florida state legislature for the creation of the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which gave them complete control within its borders. End side note. So with no picketers to interrupt them, a good chunk of the taxi driving scenes were shot on Epcot Center Drive, where there was a ton of tree foliage to make the Florida location more ambiguous. Though if you've been on that road multiple times, it's obvious to spot. Everything else, interiors in the neighborhood of Vern, was shot on the still under construction Disney MGM Studios. In fact, Vern's house would remain on the Backlot Tour attraction, visible to everyone along with Herbie the Love Bug in the driveway, until the ride itself closed in 2003. Speaking of Vern, here's a fun fact. Despite how big of an unseen character Vern was in the commercials, Ernest Saves Christmas was his only theatrical appearance, or a lack of thereof. This is personally one of my favorite moments when Ernest comes with a tree and helps set up for a party only to cause chaos.
It's Santa's little party helper. This is Harmony. She's been having a tough time, so I'm helping her out. You know, kind of a father image kind of thing. As the twig is bent, so grows the tree. Know what I mean? It'll look good right over here, huh?
Nice place. It's really you.
Yep, I just set it right in there. Don't worry, Vern, I'll make it fit. You know, hang up tinsel and some lights on this puppy and... Oh. Party punch. Yeah, that ought to hold. Superb.
Production finished in Florida in August before they flew up to Nashville to finish the scenes involving the reindeer. Ernest wouldn't be joining them as Jim Varney was heading out to Los Angeles for the Comedy Store's 15th year reunion show at the Universal Amphitheater. Varney would get to perform stand-up alongside Richard Pryor, Robin Williams, David Letterman, and Arsenio Hall. Ernest Saves Christmas would have a relatively smooth editing process, as most of the movie was already storyboarded and just had to be put together. Even the improvised jokes from Varney had little effect on the final movie. The main focus was to ensure families would laugh at Ernest and become entranced at the story of Santa passing on the mantle. John Cherry was very confident in what he created. At the first major test screening in Burbank with families and Disney executives, the response was very positive, with laughs filling the theater. This gave Cherry more assurance that he had another hit, though once the movie had ended, he was called over to Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner. They told him that they needed to talk to him about the contract he was under. They took him to the nearby Denny's to discuss that. Cherry never had a close relationship with either guys, or with anyone in LA at all, so he was worried about what they thought. "They're gonna use the hammer," he thought, fearing that Disney would want to cancel the contract. As they all sat with coffee, they made some chit-chat about their personal lives before Eisner brought up Ernest. "John, after seeing the movie, I want to talk about changing the contract. We had originally set up a 3-picture deal. Ernest Saves Christmas would be number 2. John was ready to hear the worst-case scenario. Eisner continued. "We want to extend our deal. We were thinking about 6. John ended up dropping his coffee mug on his Grand Slam breakfast that he had for dinner. The movie was released on November 11th, 1988. It would end up being released with a PG rating, which still surprises me to this day. At least with Ernest Goes to Camp, I can understand with the fighting violence. But with Ernest Saves Christmas, that movie had no language, no sexual content, or even anything violent other than an over-the-top sleigh ride that's more comical. When Varney was asked at the premiere why it got a PG rating, he replied, "Unusual cruelty to reindeer." It was obviously a joke, though it might have been in reference to the image of the reindeer being shipped via crate to Orlando. The movie opened domestically at number 2 at the box office, grossing $6 million on the first week. Number 1 was another Christmas release, the horror film Child's Play. It wouldn't have mattered as much as the next week saw the release of 2 other family animated movies, The Land Before Time and Disney's Oliver and Company. But amazingly, Ernest still remained at number 3 at the box office, while Oliver was at the number 4 spot, even though the latter had a lot more money put into the marketing. I can't find evidence of international numbers and figures, so I'll assume that it didn't get a worldwide release. By the time it left theaters, it grossed a total of $28 million, making it a financial success for Disney. While a lot of people may be shocked that it would be capable of being a success at the box office, especially at a crowded time which also included Rain Man, Twins, and the other holiday movie at the time, Scrooged. Along with its fan base going to the movie was also helped by the fact that it was the only family-oriented Christmas movie at the time. It's interesting how Ernest was once seen as a character who went from a commercial to several movies and even getting cheers bigger than Mickey Mouse. Ernest Saves Christmas in today's world tends to get 2 reactions. One from kids that'll see him as an entertaining clown, and the others that wonder what they even saw. I've accepted that I'm one of the few adults that likes Ernest Saves Christmas as it is, as a nostalgic time capsule with its own style. I doubt we'll ever get something similar again. I'm not even sure if Ernest will get the same reboot treatment as many properties the 80s and 90s have. If I'm one of the few that likes Ernest Saves Christmas, then that must make me a lot like Ernest, as someone who's aware of how people will see him as a goof, but also a nice guy who only wants what's best for everyone. Know what I mean?
Thank you for joining us on this sleigh ride into the magical world of Christmas movies. Check us out for weekly rides into your favorite Christmas classics and their histories. Be sure to give us a positive review on iTunes if you like what you heard. And don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram for updates and special news. Consider subscribing on Patreon in order to help keep the show going and to gain access to some special gifts not available to the public. Merry Monday to all, and to all a good night. See you next week.
Cut. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.